Okay, so we're here on Measure 117, which is a legislative referral for the implementation of ranked choice voting. Let's have the people who support the measure give a brief opening statement about how it would work. Mention the number of the measure, since people watching this on video may have their heads spinning by the time they get to this, and how it would be implemented, when it would start, and why it's a good idea. Please go ahead.
So this is Isabella with Next Up Action Fund. We know that voters are fed up with politics, and we see this both as a national trend and right here in Oregon. Things are becoming increasingly polarized and extreme, and really more about beating the other candidate than serving our communities. And we know that everyone's vote should count at the end of the day, but we need to change our voting system in order to reach that goal. So Measure 117 is a simple nonpartisan improvement to our elections. It brings ranked choice voting to statewide and federal elections and requires a robust voter education program that is also culturally relevant. It would go into effect in 2028. Ranked choice voting is very straightforward. You pick candidates in order of preference and vote for them that way. You're able to choose backup choices to ensure that your vote counts. This is a proven system that's already being used right here in Oregon. It's used in Benton County, it's used in Corvallis, and it's also being implemented in our most populous districts currently, Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas counties. And following that in 2022, two-thirds of Multnomah County voters voted in ranked choice voting at the local level. Maine and Alaska have both used it for statewide and federal elections as well with great success. In Oregon, Measure 117 is supported by over 125 organizations, businesses, and unions. This includes the City Club of Portland, who has done extensive research, the League of Women Voters of Oregon, as well as many culturally specific organizations like the Urban League of Portland, Coalition of Communities of Color, and others, and then unions as well, like Oregon Education Association, AFSCME Oregon, SEIU Oregon. And these groups are signed on because we know it's a simple improvement to our elections and really follows Oregon's commitment to ensuring that all voices are heard in our democracy. And I also want to mention, we know that ranked choice voting is not a silver bullet. It's one piece of the puzzle to ensure that our election system is reflective of all voters. And with over half the states having passed voter suppression laws just in the last 4 years, any steps we can take to ensure that the voices of voters are heard, that voters have more reason to actually vote and participate in our democracy, is something that we should really include with our legacy, and Measure 117 can be part of that.
Great. Just so we know who's here, could you please also introduce yourselves before we go to the no side, please?
Sure. I'm Blair Bobier. I'm one of the founders of Oregon Ranked Choice Voting Advocates.
I'm Melanie Billings-Yuen, and I'm here as a member of the Oregon League of Women Voters.
And I'm Sarah Wolk. I'm the executive director for the Equal Vote Coalition. So we're a nonpartisan, Oregon-based national nonprofit working on electoral science and voting method reform in particular.
Okay. And you know on this, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ed Deal, state representative for House District 17, that covers East Salem up through the Santiam Canyon.
Okay. So you guys are not together, right? You're
Right.
So why don't we have one of you guys go first, and then we'll give you a chance to give the other one a chance shortly.
Sure. Answer if you want.
So I'm coming at this issue with an interesting perspective. I was a huge advocate and organizer for ranked choice voting for years. And it wasn't until I started getting really involved in doing a deep dive in advance of trying to get something on the ballot here in Portland that I discovered that a lot of the talking points that we heard from the other side just aren't true. So for me, I was really inspired by the idea that we should be able to vote our conscience without worrying about wasting our votes, and then we should eliminate vote splitting and the spoiler effect to actually ensure representative winners. And ranked choice voting, Isabella here said, you know, the goal is to ensure that your vote counts. But with ranked choice voting, fundamentally the reason we oppose it is because your vote doesn't necessarily count. Some people whose favorite doesn't win will not have their next choice counted, even if their next choice was preferred over all others, even if their next choice was relevant.
Can you just explain that, please?
Yeah, so in ranked choice voting, you rank your candidates, and then it's tallied through elimination rounds. where you count just the first choice votes and you eliminate the candidate who came in last place. But each round will eliminate voters, not only candidates. Some people won't be able to have their vote transfer in each round because A, they might not have a next choice, but more importantly, their next choice might be gone already. And then you declare a winner when you reach a majority of remaining active voters, which is not a true majority of actual people. So you can still have vote splitting in the spoiler effect, as we saw in the first statewide election in Alaska, where they're trying to repeal it now.
So you're an advocate for star voting, are you not?
Yeah, our organizations.
And I don't want you to talk about star voting per se. I want to ask you about that. Are you opposed to ranked choice voting because you prefer star voting, or are you opposed to ranked choice voting because it's not good?
So I'm opposed to ranked choice voting because I do think it's an existential threat to the voting reform movement. I think it's worse than the current system in a couple of key ways, and that the gains it does get are oversold. But we don't just support star voting, we support any voting method.
What are those two key ways that it's worse than the current system?
It creates new ways to waste your vote, exhausted ballots, voter errors. There's actually 5 different new ways it can waste your vote. And then the second is that it undermines election security. So we can't afford to be introducing new ways that our vote is less secure now. And ranked choice voting, because they don't count all the rankings, it has to be centrally tabulated, and we have seen a number of major jurisdictions, New York City and Oakland, California, both actually mistally their elections completely with ranked choice voting. Something that's unprecedented.
Was that a replicable error, or the kind of error that once it's made, people won't make again?
I think it's a replicable error because it traces back to the fact that election officials can't check their work as they go. Because again, with the current system and with any good voting method, as ballots come in, you can tally them and you can find the total for that subset of ballots, whether that's precinct 1 or Multnomah County or anything like that. And with ranked choice voting, because you're not counting all of the rankings, you're not able to fully tally or audit a subset of ballots.
That's because some of the ballots are discarded without being counted.
Yeah, it's because most of the rankings in most competitive elections will never be counted.
Okay.
And you don't know which ones will or won't
Great.
be.
Let's stop there. You guys seem to be shaking your heads. Let's hear from you.
So we hear this quite frequently from Sarah. So by and large, it's somewhere between exaggeration and nonsense. Wasted votes is something, in a typical election, we call that people voting for losing candidates. So in a plurality system, which we have now, and I like looking at the 2022 primary, Christine Drazan won the Republican primary for governor with about 23% of the vote. 77% of the people voted for losing candidates. So 77% of the people are a vast majority, but they wound up being in the losing category. So that's 77% of what I would call wasted votes. It's a vote that doesn't go for a winner.
No, it goes for a loser. It was counted.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So why is that a wasted vote? You don't. Not everybody gets to win.
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying. So what Sarah's talking about of votes being wasted.
Well, no, but you're talking about votes that didn't take place in ranked choice voting. So you're saying those 77% in the Republican primary were wasted votes.
That's what I'm saying. I'm equating.
But they're not, because they were cast for people who lost.
Correct.
They were counted. You don't get to win. Not everybody gets to win. So why is that wasted?
So I'm
I can
equating.
clarify that's not what I'm
Let Blair finish, please.
So what Sarah's saying is that there is elimination, instant runoff from the bottom up, right?
Yeah.
So what she's saying is that there are votes in the final round that don't go towards a winning candidate. Okay, that's a losing vote. That's voting for a loser. So I'm equating that to the 77% of the
I
people.
see. Okay.
Okay? So, and then these other things. Alaska, it worked the way it was supposed to. Mary Peltola, who won the race for Congress, is the most popular politician in Alaska now, according to polls. Alaska is an independent state. It elected a conservative Republican governor. It elected a moderate Republican for the U.S. Senate, and it elected Mary Peltola, who's a moderate Democrat. We hear the same stuff about New York City and Oakland. Ed, if he sticks to his script, will talk about Burlington, Vermont, which they cite as these, supposed failures. Ranked choice voting is used in 50 plus places around the country. And there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of ranked choice voting elections, if you include Australia's, which has been using ranked choice voting for 100 years.
Okay, let me stop you there for
Sure.
a second. I want to ask you about something Isabella said in the beginning, which is that this is a nonpartisan measure. Yet, when I read the voters pamphlet, when I listen to debate around town, when I look at who's here today, as a Republican, typically Republicans are opposed, in Oregon, Republicans are opposed to this.
And-
Democrats are for it. I'm sorry.
And election science, the election science community
Okay,
has been
let me
opposed
just
to
let me
it.
make this a question, and we'll get to you. So, is it really nonpartisan? Because it seems to me very partisan.
Yeah, it's a nonpartisan, bipartisan supported initiative. If you look across the country, there is bipartisan.
Let's talk about Oregon. Where's your Republican support in Oregon?
So when we got this on the ballot in Benton County in 2016, Dan Rayfield was one of the sponsors of that, as was I. We had every candidate in his state representative district supporting this. So we had the Republican candidate, Independent Party candidate, Libertarian, and the
But
Democrat.
now that this measure is on the ballot, can you cite Republicans in Oregon who support this measure?
It is relatively slim at the leadership level.
Why do you think that is?
I think that's a good question, and we can ask Ed that. I think
Well,
from
I'm asking you that.
Okay, so I'm going to give you my answer. Thanks for letting me do that. I wonder. I think that one of the things about using ranked choice voting is that you eliminate extremism out of the primaries. So if you look back to 2016, if Republicans had used ranked choice voting, Donald Trump wouldn't have been elected. He did not get a majority of the votes until way late in the primaries, after all the other candidates had been eliminated. So if ranked choice voting had been used from the get-go, we might have gotten someone almost as obnoxious like Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz or someone, but Trump was not a consensus candidate. So I wonder if those in the Republican Party are interested in perpetuating getting candidates from the extreme. I don't know. I'd have to ask them.
Ed, I'd like to hear from Ed. We haven't heard from you yet.
Yeah, so a number of things here. Just to respond to the partisan piece, I don't know of a single Republican that does support this. Maybe there are some out there. I don't know of any.
And why do you think that is?
What I think is the same thing. I mean, I could tell you why I'm opposed to it. Any change that we make to an election system, we need to know absolutely sure that it's providing more good and not producing more harm. And there's plenty of evidence that shows that this is producing some harm. And
Tell me.
well,
Give me your best example.
okay, for one, it leads to some wonky unintended results where you can have a winner come out of an election that would have lost every head-to-head competition with his opponent. And still, because of the way the instant runoff process works, that person comes out as a winner. That's not a desirable result. The other thing is transparency. Transparency in our elections, especially right now when people are concerned about election integrity. This takes some control away from the counties in how elections are counted. So it isn't just a change in how we vote, it's a change in how we count and tally elections. You cannot tally a ranked choice voting election at a precinct level. All the votes are brought together in an aggregate, and then run through a software program to calculate the results. So you need all those individual ballots together. So for a statewide election, that means the states or the counties are handing individual vote data, vote cast records to the state. They don't do that right now. They're giving totals to the state. They tally up here's what I got in precinct for Joe and Bob, and then that goes to the county, they tally that up, and then those totals go to the state for the total. You can't do that with ranked choice voting. You have to have centralized that control. So that's taking control from the counties.
Okay.
That also, whenever you centralize systems like that, you're increasing the risk for a cybersecurity threat and things like that. So anyway, those are just some of the things. It doesn't. They talk about it leading to a majority vote. I believe that the ballot title is misleading. It does not lead to a majority vote, and unless you redefine what you think of as a majority.
Why doesn't it?
Because as we were talking about where ballots get exhausted, so as you proceed through rounds, those ballots are exhausted. They're not counted in the denominator when you calculate a majority. Let's say you have 100 people that voted. Okay, what's a majority? 51 votes. But through the rounds, let's say 20 of those votes are exhausted. They're not included in the final round. A majority, as reported by ranked choice voting, then would be 41. That's not a majority as how anyone else would think of it. So we have to redefine what majority means in order to say ranked choice voting leads to a majority vote.
Go ahead.
The Oregon Supreme Court has ruled on that, and they ruled that the ballot title for Measure 117, ranked choice voting, as written, is false. It's misleading. It claims that a candidate will have a majority. If a candidate has a majority in one of the rounds, that candidate will be the winner. And a majority of votes means a majority of votes counted for active candidates in a final round of tallying, they wrote. We therefore refer the ballot title to the Attorney General for modification. So as written, it claims that candidates will have a majority, and that's what voters want. And that is a really clear case of this stuff being drafted by people who aren't experts, who don't actually understand the tabulation or the implications. But due to recent changes in the legislature, there was no mechanism for enforcement. So the ballot title is going forward.
So no Attorney General review?
There was a revision that changed a couple words in one section, but not everywhere that the Supreme Court required. And that's the Oregon Supreme Court.
I did want to finish the partisan piece where, I don't know of any Republicans that support it, but I don't see this as a partisan issue either. The vote in the House and Senate was pretty much along partisan lines, unfortunately. But the Marion County Democrat Central Committee has recently voted to oppose ranked choice voting. The Washington D.C. Democrats oppose ranked choice voting.
That's incorrect. I'll refer to it later.
Well, I've got the article.
It's incorrect.
Correct.
I've got the article. Anyway, there's NAACP chapters that are opposed to ranked choice voting.
So there are, of course, 1 million Democratic organizations in Washington, D.C. Which specific one are you talking about?
The Washington, D.C. Democrat Party.
In Washington, D.C., it was a combination between ranked choice voting and nonpartisan elections. They made it very clear that their primary concern was with having nonpartisan elections. So it was not single ranked choice voting.
I'm still unclear about which organization we're talking about, the Democratic Party.
The NAACP was concerned in Oakland about ranked choice voting combined with nonpartisan elections. The Democratic Party in Washington was concerned about the combination of ranked choice voting and nonpartisan elections. In both cases, they made it clear that their primary concern was with nonpartisan elections. I also want to say, going back to this issue, and thank you for pointing out that it's nonpartisan, I'm here on behalf of the League of Women Voters. We are absolutely nonpartisan. The League of Women Voters of the United States has endorsed ranked choice voting. The League of Women Voters of Oregon has endorsed ranked choice voting, and 5 local leagues have endorsed ranked choice voting.
And so give me your elevator pitch. I'm sure your friends ask you why. Why do you think it's better?
I think it's better for a few reasons. One, and this one I'm actually going to be talking more about what the league position is. One of the things they like best about this is that it is leading to less partisan divide in elections. that it leads to more cooperation between candidates because on the whole, if you are not someone's first choice, you could be their second or third choice, that it brings down the heat in what is a very divided time. The second thing is that it does more represent what the broader group of people support. So they made a reference to Alaska. Yes, absolutely, Sarah Palin got the most votes on the first choice. But when it came to the second choice, when the other Republican there, Begich, was knocked out of the vote, his voters did not go to Sarah Palin. Many of them crossed the line and went for the Democrat. And they ended up electing someone who was a Democrat, but she was the choice of the broader number of people. And as Isabella said, is now, maybe it was you, Blair, is the most popular elected official in Alaska. So those are two of the reasons. The other reason is, and this comes because we are a league of women voters. Historically, the people that are most harmed by our current election system are women and people of color. Because people will not, when they have a choice between two candidates, they will be afraid to endorse a woman. It happens again and again. This problem goes way down when we have ranked choice voting, and we have numbers to show it.
So there's just 1 second, I want to follow up on that. So there's a paper that was written by a PhD student at the University of California, Davis, that looked at 30 years of ranked choice voting and found that it doesn't do many of the things that proponents would like it to do.
Correct.
Have you all read that paper?
I have read so many papers, and you can cherry pick things. The ones I find most interesting are the ones that are based on actual numbers. So to give you one right here, I don't have the world's best memory anymore, but I do all the work. In terms of people of color and women, in April 2020, so this is somewhat out of date, but it was a piece of research that was done by 4 researchers in the University of California and other places. Nearly half of all mayors, 46%, decided by ranked choice voting are held by women. By comparison, women comprise 23% of mayors in non-RCV jurisdictions. I can tell you from my own personal self and knowing other friends, the truth is, you look at the 2020 election, and in the primary, there were women and men. After 2016, we were afraid to vote for a woman. We were afraid, because if that vote won't count, it'll be a wasted vote. But with ranked choice voting, I can vote for whoever I want, and if that person is knocked out, then I have my backup choice that it goes to.
Okay, thanks. Let's let the other side jump.
Yeah. First off, it does not eliminate the spoiler effect. So we got to dive into that to make it really clear, because it does not. But let's look at the claim that it increases more female representation, and I think that's a noble goal. But look at Oregon. I serve in the House. 28, almost half of the representatives in the House are female. We've had 2 female governors in a row. We've had 2 Secretary of State females in a row. We have a female Attorney General. We don't have ranked choice voting, but we still have a great female representation. I think there's something else going on. I think if you look at the demographics behind some of these ranked choice voting districts that she's talking about, they're more progressive. They're going to tend toward that trend anyway to vote for females. It is not related necessarily to ranked choice voting.
How many female senators have we had? How many female presidents?
So I'd love to speak to this. I'm a League of Women Voters member as well. And one of our biggest concerns is the voter equity issue with ranked choice voting.
When you say we, are you talking about League of Women Voters, or are you talking about
I'll speak for the Equal Vote Coalition, my organization, and
you can't speak for the League unless you've been authorized to do
here's
so.
what I was about to say about the League, though, is League policy is to speak with one voice on issues, and the League is not of one voice on this issue. There are strong members within the League, Barbara Klein, for example, but there are a number of...
We'll let the League represent itself, but please speak
dissenting
from
voices.
your position as an opponent.
On the equity piece, which is where I was going with this, with ranked choice voting, if you give 2 candidates the same ranking, you say, let's say there's 20 candidates for Portland City Council, or let's say Portland Mayor, to keep it single winner.
Yeah.
And you say, I like these ones first choice, this one's my second choice, these two are about tied for third choice. That is a voided ballot. That's a ballot error. And we've seen all around the country, including the study that you cited and many others in New York City and Minneapolis, that
Hold on, so you're
that
saying
people
are putting two names on the same line?
no, people who rank two candidates the same, both first choice or both second choice,
Yeah,
that's a
but-
really common voter error.
Really?
It's about 10 times more likely to happen to communities of color and already marginalized communities than under the current
And how
system.
do you know that?
Dozens of studies at this point, peer-reviewed studies
give me the
on
best-
real-world
best one.
ballot data.
There's Minneapolis. They were looking at precinct by precinct, and there were huge differences in
Okay.
And-
exhausted ballots. New York City also
Exhausted
has.
ballots is something else.
Yeah, and I'm
Exhausted
talking-
ballots can be due to errors.
Yeah,
or- but-
don't combine things. Just stick with the facts, okay? Exhausted ballots is something
So-
else.
There, so specifically lower income precincts, communities of color, and especially people who speak English as a second language are more likely to have their vote wasted under ranked choice voting, and that's a completely unnecessary flaw. So we support a number of voting methods at the Equal Vote Coalition. There are better ways to count ranked ballots. Under ranked robin, you rank all the candidates, you can give equal rankings if you like candidates equally. The voter interface is much easier and it gets more accurate results.
Let me stop
But
you there. 'cause
the
I'm
ranked
sorry,
choice voting
I
faction
wanna-
has been one of the leading
Okay.
opponents of other better voting methods that have outperformed it in
Ed,
the
we'll come back
science.
to you in just a second.
Sure.
Go ahead,
I would
Isabel,
just
you
like to
disagree.
Thank you. I'd just like to put on the record that there is lots of research showing that voters across demographics think RCV is simple as well as like it. And not only that, they found in San Francisco that Black, Latino, and Asian voters were actually more likely to fully rank their ballots. Additional research has also examined many other cities and found similar trends. So in a case study of 2022, the Oakland mayoral race, Black and Latino voters ranked more candidates than white voters on average. And this really builds on previous understandings, and we're happy to send many other studies that show
Yeah,
this.
would you send us?
And I
those,
agree
please?
that
We
people
can.
like showing
I
their
wish you'd
preference.
stop
Can you let me
interrupting.
finish,
Let's
actually?
let her
Yeah, thank
finish,
you.
please.
They've also found, you mentioned New York, over 90% of Black, Latino, and Asian voters found their ranked choice voting ballots simple to complete. And there was a study by a more right-leaning entity called the Center for Election Competence that suggested that minority voters in New York and Alaska are more likely to have exhausted ballots in ranked choice voting. But what they actually found is in some cases that may be true, but in other cases and precincts, that's not true. So it's really trying to skew the narrative that this is a true fact, when it's just not. Like,
Yeah.
our communities know how to rank ballots.
Okay, I got a couple questions I want to ask the proponents. One is that this referral does not include legislative races. Why not?
So there are a number of reasons for that. So we've been working on this for a number of years. There was a bill in the 2021 legislative session, and there have been various iterations of it. We've met with a number of elections officials and county clerks who kept asking us to narrow the scope of the measure. So though they say that they did not ask us specifically to omit legislative races, they did ask us to include the races where ranked choice voting would have the greatest effect. And out of the coalition of 120-some groups, between our coalition and our sponsors in the legislature, taking into account what the elections officials said, we came up with the framework that you see, and we think it's a good.
It has an odd appearance that the legislature is asking people to do things in other races but not theirs. And secondly, it feeds into the idea that complexity is an issue here because, of course, many legislative districts span several counties. So is it omitted because it's too complicated?
No, not at all. And you can talk to Tim Scott. He's the director of elections here. He's running an election that spans 3 counties. And I'd encourage you not to take what we say and not what Sarah says. Talk to some elections officials. There is no concern about the hyper-technical and I think way off base stuff that they're throwing out there.
I have a quote from the association.
Several county clerks have opposed this measure, which is very unusual. So tell me about that.
Sure. So none of the clerks that have gone, first of all, I believe what they've said is they've raised concerns. They're not opposed to it,
Okay.
to state that clearly.
False.
None of those people who are raising concerns are anyone who has worked with ranked choice voting. So the Benton County clerk is not one of those people. That's been part of the county charter since 2016. Tim Scott in Multnomah County, the Clackamas County, Washington County clerks, none of the clerks from the most populous counties, none of the clerks from the counties where it's actually being used have raised any kind of concerns. What I believe I've seen their concerns are about staffing, about potential cost,
Training.
and because they feel under threat from people who are election deniers, so that they're already stressed. We will absolutely go to bat and try and secure funding for this. It's relatively minimal compared to the overall state budget. Voter education is a big component of it. That's going to take place in English and in the 5 most commonly used languages in Oregon in addition to English. So
Okay.
Can I
Great.
just add one
No,
quick
no,
thing?
just one second. I
Okay.
want these people to respond to that.
I just want to read this quote. So, the Association of County Clerks, testifying on behalf of the Association of County Clerks, and Tim Scott, our Multnomah County clerk, was president of the Association of County Clerks right up until this time. But he testified that elections should be accessible, simple, affordable, predictable, secure, auditable, and yield timely and accurate results. RCV does none of these things.
Who testified to that?
Brian Van Bergen on behalf of Oregon Association of County Clerks. And it's very rare, like you said, for the association to come out in opposition to something like this. It is their job to officiate our elections here in Oregon, and they take that responsibility very seriously.
When did he say that? In what form?
On 3/16/23, testifying to the Oregon legislature
Okay.
on the matter.
Ed, do you want to
On-
say something?
Yes. For one thing, some of the clerks are not going to take a position at all because they're not in a position to do so. Tim Scott is not going to tell you he's for it or against it. His job is to implement what he's been asked to implement, and he's doing a very professional job at that. So this, I've heard in 2 debates where the clerks asked for the legislators to be pulled out. So with some help, I checked with all 36 clerks. All 36 clerks deny that they asked for the legislators to be pulled out. In fact, they asked for the legislators to be put in, and I have an email to that effect. And what I've been told, because the 2021 version of this bill had legislators in it, it didn't go anywhere. What I've been told is that the legislators were pulled out because they needed votes. They needed votes in the Senate to pass this thing. They weren't going to get Democrat support if they were part of the bill.
So,
So
if I
they-
may, I'm sorry.
This clerk thing is really, I mean, I've had some very angry responses when I brought this up because they did not ask for them to be pulled out. One person I talked to called it a bald-faced lie.
Okay, so would you guys like to respond?
Yeah, I would
please?
like Blair to say something about this because he was doing the direct negotiation, but I do just want to point out one thing. And that is, when we instituted vote by mail, it was not swiftly, everyone was happy with it. And so it did go through a period where we started out with just doing local and counties, and then it was just special elections, and then it was just federal primaries. So it does take people to get used to an idea. But the fact is they liked the idea, and it proved to be very effective. And in this case, we are giving people significantly more time than the clerks of Alaska and Maine were given. It won't go in effect until 2028, which is twice as long as they were given. And the state has promised to provide funding for training and for all of the software and so forth that they would need. It is natural to be afraid of a change, but everything in this bill has been made thanks to the work that Blair and his group have been doing to ensure that this is something that could be passed smoothly.
I'm not a promise.
Just one second.
Sure. So judges aren't part of it either. Okay, it's not some.
Yeah, but come on, judicial elections are a joke.
How
I have something
how
really
often,
relevant to add
excuse
here.
me, please. How often are state legislative races hotly contested? How
Well,
many-
those that are crucial,
many of them are unopposed.
correct.
Right.
But every cycle, there are a handful of very closely contested races that really determine not only the control, but also whether it's a supermajority or not, so.
So, you know, we're happy to level up and add legislative races. I mean, if people want to add judicial races, if there's a consensus for that. I mean, I think it's
Just a red herring, you know.
it is a step forward, right? We're trying to improve the electoral system.
Yeah.
This applies to federal races. It applies to statewide races in both the primary and the general election. And if you look at a lot of those races, that's where you have less than majority winners. We have a less than majority winner for governor. A number of the primaries, people were winning with 30-some% of the vote. That's what this is directed towards. It's an improvement. It's not as,
It's a step.
yeah, it's a positive step in the right direction.
Sarah?
So if it were a step in the right direction, I would support it. And I think people should look at voting methods like approval voting if we're looking for a stepping stone. But we owe it to Oregon voters to get this right the first time. We're looking at tens of millions of dollars or more in implementation to create a new body that centralizes all ballots statewide under the Secretary of State for implementation. And that's currently illegal, as it should be in Oregon. Oregon election law is really explicit, requiring precinct level totals, votes that are tallied by our county clerks at the county level, and requiring auditability and checks and balances at the local level. This bill, as originally written by the legislature, didn't touch that piece of the law. And so we emailed in, we wrote every legislator and we said, as written, this law is illegal. Oregon law requires local tabulation. So they promptly didn't respond to our email, the Democratic leaders behind this, and then quietly amended the bill in the Rules Committee to strike that entire section that protects Oregon election security. ORS 246560. And that's a huge red flag, especially on the heels of, again, historic and unprecedented election failures, where Alameda County in Oakland mistallied every single ranked choice voting election. They didn't notice. They seated the wrong candidate in one case. They had to remove that candidate in the courts later, and they didn't discover the issue until they sent off their data to a third party for data analysis.
Okay.
And same thing with New York Board of Elections. They accidentally added 135,000 test ballots and they didn't notice. That's the common thread. Election officials under ranked choice voting can't check their work as they go. And that's why they oppose it.
Isabel?
We've also seen mistallies in non-ranked choice voting elections. It happened in New Jersey. They added a number of different ballots to the election.
But they will touch it.
Alameda County has chronic issues with their elections office. This was not the first one, and it was more about a human error rather than ranked choice voting.
So one of the issues that we already face in Oregon is slow tallies. We see it every cycle. Won't this slow counting down conservatively?
No, and I'd like to respond, if I can, to this question of legality and counting and whatever. Not a whole lot's going to change. Ballots will come in to the counties. They check them for signatures, they open the envelopes, they stack them up, they run it through a tabulator. The only difference now is that statewide races will have to be tabulated centrally. And it doesn't mean tallied centrally. It doesn't mean that the ballots are going to be shipped somewhere. So the idea that this affects election law and invalidates it is really just nonsense. Sarah's not an attorney. I don't admit it often, but I am. Yeah, we've seen your...
So could you just slow that down a little
Sure.
bit for me? So let's talk about a governor's race, for
Sure.
instance. So how's it going to be different in terms of how each county will receive ballots? So what will be different under RCV?
So under RCV, some form of information needs to be sent to the Secretary of State's office. The way it's done now is the totals are sent to the Secretary of State's office because all the ballots are counted in counties.
Yeah.
So you get the total, you send it to the Secretary of State's office.
Yeah.
Now what's going to happen is that the information, whether it's the cast vote record, most likely, and that can be transmitted to the Secretary of State's office either electronically in some kind of physical form, but yeah, they're going to be counted in one spot for the rounds because you have to produce
They're going to be counted centrally.
for the statewide races, and yeah.
So what about the issues where ballots come in at different speeds in different counties? So it seems like it's only going to go as fast as the slowest county.
And that's true now as well.
Okay.
There's no difference. So the only delays I think that we're likely to see are because of the new
But
postal
don't you have to have all ballots in order to figure out who's going to get eliminated? Let's say there are 4 candidates for governor.
Right.
In order to eliminate the 4th candidate, don't we have to have all ballots in?
Well, I suppose you'd have to have a statistical amount. I mean, if the person...
No, you'd have to have them all in because how do you know they don't all skew? Let's say that all the ballots, the last 10% of ballots, come from a deeply red county.
Okay.
So I don't see that. How can you not wait until all of the ballots?
I
are
can
in?
tell you what Multnomah County is doing currently with ranked
That's
choice
not what I
voting.
asked you.
But that's on ranked choice voting. It shows the system and how it works. So what Multnomah County is going to be doing, which answers directly to your question, is that every day they run all the ballots that are in. So on the first day, you do get a counting from what happened on the first day. On the second day, it's run with all the ballots in. Third day, it's run with all the ballots in.
So that's one county, but you have to get all the ballots from 36 counties.
That's right, but then they put a time limit on the point at which, with the postmark rule, the time limit of how long they will accept ballots. And at that point, once again, they've been giving preliminary voting results all the way along, but at the end, you get your final tally. And because of the postmark rule, the feeling is that you won't have a total response until about 2 weeks in, but that would be the same whether it's ranked choice voting or any form of voting.
Would it?
The clerk specified it would take more than
How do you
a
know? How do you know? Until you have all ballots, how can you eliminate anybody?
Because so on day 1, I'm eliminating based on what ballots I have in. But on day 2,
No.
yes,
So-
you can do it on that. This is what I was told by Multnomah
So
County,
ma-
but go ahead.
So what Melanie's saying, so first of all, it's the same as now. If you've got a tight race that's 50%, 50%, give or take, you got to wait till you have all the ballots before you find out a winner. It's no different with ranked choice voting. So what they do in San Francisco and other places is, as the ballots come in, you see who's got the first choice votes, second, third, etc. And then when all the ballots are in, which is going to be the same for ranked choice or non-ranked choice,
No, it's not because
Why not?
because the way that ballots trend when you're only looking for who got the most votes is
Right.
is relatively predictable
Okay.
based on voter registration and historical patterns. But
not determinative, right?
It becomes determinative at some point.
At some point.
But about with 5 names on it that's coming from Gilliam County, and of course there aren't many ballots in Gilliam County, but it is a very different ballot from the one that's coming from Benton County. So it seems to me that this has to delay things.
It doesn't. I mean, I don't see the ballots
Because
come
you
in.
can't eliminate people until you're sure if there are 4 candidates for governor, who's the fourth place.
But you're saying it would eliminate people before you've counted all the votes?
No, they don't eliminate them, but they do vote, they run it through the computer and they tell you what the results are on that day. They can run it and the results will change on the second day, just as it currently does.
You guys are
see-
correct. You have to
see
go
the
through the rounds
rankings.
in order,
You see
one
the-
at a time.
You see the rankings, but there's a deadline, right? The postmark rule says that
Sure.
ballots have to be accepted to a certain point.
Right.
So at that point is when you'll know the answer.
But I'm saying to you that the question that you're asking where they first pass the post election is a different question because you only have one variable. Who's got the most votes?
Okay.
With a ranked choice voting ballot, you have 4 variables.
But just still, it doesn't make a difference because once the deadline is there, then you know. So
Yeah, but we're very rarely, except for some legislative votes, going to the 2-week deadline.
None of the 50 jurisdictions that use ranked choice voting have complained about delays. Not one of them. So, I mean,
Well-
he's
How many
absolutely right.
How many states are doing statewide elections
2.
with ranked choice voting?
2.
Maine
And they're both happy with them.
Maine and Alaska.
But I will say that this issue of delay is because of the postmark rule. And it'll be a delay whether we have a regular ballot, any kind of ballot. We're going to have delays because of the postmark
Let's
rule.
move on. Go
Well,
ahead.
one thing, if you did a preliminary result, you may knock off Joe, and then every other round after that, it's gonna be cascading effect. And then when you bring the rest of the ballots in, oh, Joe wasn't the guy we should have knocked off, it was Bob. It's gonna lead to radically different looking intermediate results. And I don't think people are gonna be satisfied with that. And the system we have now, it is pretty obvious. Oh, all the votes aren't in, things may shift a little bit, but it won't be radically different. There's a couple points I wanted to bring up. I heard that there's a promise to fund this. There is no such thing as a promise committing future legislators to fund anything. This ballot measure has no funding associated with it. So there's no budget. I'm not even aware of an estimate. So obviously it's going to have to be, some funding is going to have to come from somewhere, but there is no promise to fund it. Another thing that I heard is there's really no difference other than we're tallying at, we're consolidating our tally at the state level. There's huge differences in how counties are going to have to implement their elections as a result of this. And I'm not saying it's rocket science, but it's big differences. For example, any given county, like Marion County, I think they have over 340 different types of ballot. Every one of those ballots goes through an audit and verification process before they're actually printed out and distributed. And a lot of those cross all jurisdictional lines. That has to all be recreated. And I've talked to some of these clerks, and they're worried about that. How do we do this? Again, it's not rocket science. We'll figure it out, but it's adding complexity to the system. And also, just in general, how do you audit results? How do you audit results in a clear way that voters will understand? Right now, we can do that. Hey, go to that bin, pick precinct number 25, and hand count those. Does that match the result we got when we scanned those ballots in? Yes. That's a very simple, easy way to audit. The election that Portland is doing with their election system now, the new one, there is no agreed upon method to audit that kind of a ranked choice vote election.
We're not using that one. I just want to point out one other thing. I don't think the issue of when the ballots come in and the race is decided is I don't think it's an issue actually. But for many of those races, you'll see if someone's actually got a majority of the first choice votes.
Yeah.
So you'll know anyway. It's only those races where the instant runoff comes into effect.
I'm just curious, we had a governor's race in 2022, which was a little unusual because we had a stronger third-party candidate than we usually have. So Betsy Johnson got 8.63% of the vote. Under ranked choice voting, who do you think would have won?
We don't like looking backwards at that.
Well, I'm asking you a question.
I don't know. I think that when candidates campaign under ranked choice voting, it's a different type of campaign. So they have to reach out to a broader section of the electorate. You can't just go for your base. You might need the second choice votes of your opponents. So they campaign differently, and it yields different results.
So if we really cared about moving elections to the middle and eliminating the extremism in both parties, why don't we have open primaries?
So that's a different reform that's not on the ballot now, right?
I feel like the legislature is being very precise in what it wants us to do and what it doesn't want us to do. It doesn't want us to have open primaries. It doesn't want us to include legislators in ranked choice voting. I feel like we're being spoon-fed something that, a lot of democratically oriented special interest groups think's good for us, which makes me nervous.
Did you want to answer? You want me to take a swing at it?
Let me finish with this line of questioning first, and then we'll come to you.
Yeah. So one, this bill and this referral is something that was created organically. In 2016, when we got Benton County to be the first county, honestly, we wanted it to be used in Benton County because that's where we live, Dan Rayfield and I, and we also wanted to use it as kind of a stepping stone to get it used more broadly. And starting back with the 2021 legislative session, there's a group of the coalition that's come together, groups that both these ladies represent, and the policy was developed over time. City Club of Portland has endorsed this measure. The League of Women Voters has endorsed this measure. So it doesn't do everything. It's not perfect.
Can you point to a candidate who has won in Benton County who wouldn't have won under first past the post voting? In other words, I mean, Benton County is bluer than Multnomah County by some measurements. Have we seen a moderation in the electorate?
So we've seen an instant runoff take place in Corvallis for mayor, where, by the way, 95% of the people use their second choice rankings. It hasn't come into effect in the county commissioner races. What has happened is that candidates have said, I'd like to be your first choice, but if I'm not going to be, I'd like to be your second choice. We could see how many second choice votes both the Green Party and Libertarian candidates got, and the county commissioners can see where that support lies. So I know I've spoken to the chair of the Benton County Commissioners, the candidate who ran against her, I think in 2020, for the Green Party got a pretty substantial amount of second choice votes, got about 10% of the first choice votes. So they can see where the electorate's actual desires lie.
Okay.
So on the fundamental problem that we're trying to solve here, under the current system where you choose one candidate only, it's only really accurate if there's two candidates in the race, and that's why we have a two-party system. If you have a third party, even if it's Green Party with 1% of the vote, in a close election they can split the vote, throw the election, and that's the spoiler effect. And ranked choice voting effectively solves that problem if there's only two frontrunners. But anytime there's 3 or more competitive elections, that third candidate can still split the vote, change the order of elimination, change the winners. And that's exactly what we saw in Alaska. So Alaska is a mirror image of Oregon in a lot of ways. It's a red state that has a large independent faction and a large Democratic progressive faction as well. And in that first trial run of ranked choice voting, 60% of voters preferred one of the two Republicans. Sarah Palin was the spoiler there. But the moderate was preferred head-to-head over all others. So a majority of Alaskans preferred Nick Begich over the eventual winner. And here in Oregon with the Christine Drazan example.
So dumb that down for me. What is that?
So they didn't count all the rankings. And so right off the top, they eliminated the candidate who actually was preferred over all others if you looked at all of the ballot data. And that's the fundamental problem with ranked choice voting. It makes people feel like they have more choices. People do like showing their preferences, and I agree with what you were saying, Isabella, that voters do rank multiple candidates. but then we don't count those rankings, and that's fundamentally disingenuous. I think it violates Oregon's constitutional equal protections clause, specifically that if your first choice is eliminated, my next choice might be counted, but not yours. You know, if our favorites both lose, we should both have our next choice counted, guaranteed. And that's just not the way it works.
Okay.
And so here in Oregon, and I really do want to get to this, I'll be brief.
Yeah.
In our last Oregon gubernatorial election, we had 3 competitive candidates. And I think with ranked choice voting, we would have seen a lot more support for our middle candidate there. But the thing is, in ranked choice voting, it still has that lesser evil spoiler effect. And voting for your favorite in first choice can actually backfire worse than if you hadn't voted at all.
So who do you think would have won
and-
2022 in RCV? Who's the governor?
I don't know, but this
Take a guess.
is a progressive leaning state,
Uh-huh.
and so it should have probably been the left candidate. Whether or not a third party could win in Oregon if we actually broke 2-party
No,
domination.
I'm not saying, doesn't
But-
it seem obvious that Drazen is the winner?
So I'm not a polling expert. I want to speak to my area of expertise, and I am a peer-reviewed author on this. So the spoiler effect under ranked choice voting is called the center squeeze spoiler. And the candidate in the middle is at a statistical disadvantage because they're competing with candidates on both sides. And you have no way to show, I prefer both of these, moderate lefties over, a far-right Republican. You have no way to show equal support. And so it does have the spoiler effect, in many ways worse than the current system. And so claims that it fights polarization are just, it may fight the most extreme polarizing candidates, but it does hurt candidates in the middle mathematically.
And you had something to say?
Real quick, speaking of Betsy Johnson, she calls ranked choice voting hogwash, by the way. She calls it a lot of other names that I can't repeat here, but she's not a fan. I do want to talk about the claim that this is that ranked choice voting is an organic initiative. And I gotta strongly disagree with that. There are massive out-of-state interests that are putting tons of money into a lot of different states to pass ranked choice voting. Arabella, I think it's Arabella Partners, is dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into different states to pass this. In Oregon, we have a group called, it's a C4 that was set up in Oregon Ranked Choice Voting. It is the one dumping the lion's share of the money into the PAC, the Measure Yes on 117 PAC. They're a C4. We don't know where the money's coming from. Up until the end of September, they put in over $600,000. On October 1st, they did a dump of over $1 million. Where's this money coming from? And if I look at what's going on in every other state, it's not organic in-state funding. There's a DC group that just dumped $200,000 into this.
After reading a lot about this issue and after listening to all of you who've been very informative for an hour, I still don't quite get the partisan element here. So I assume that you think that this money is coming from groups that are left-leaning or democratically oriented.
The ones that I know of,
Yeah.
Yes.
So how does this benefit Democrats?
It doesn't innately benefit any particular party. It's
So
a bipartisan-
why when we look at the 125 organizations that support this measure, they almost all?
They're not all Democrat though.
They're
There's many
almost all.
nonpartisan. There's many labor unions which are not a
Well, come on.
Yeah.
But
It doesn't benefit a political party, and we see this
all the
across
money,
elections across
all the
US.
money and support is coming from one side, and all the opposition is coming from another. And I'm not
Which I think
being
is unfortunate.
disingenuous here. I don't understand why that is.
I don't.
I don't either.
I do.
Honestly.
I think the Republican Party has changed over time. We've seen that in the last 8 years. And so they've moved away from a moderate position. Ranked choice voting does help push people more toward the middle. That's not where the Republican Party is right now. But if you look, they use ranked choice voting throughout Utah because they instituted it before all of this happened.
They just
And
repealed it in
and
11
Virginia.
jurisdictions
There's
there.
no evidence.
Okay, we are out of time. Let's give you 30 seconds each. If there's something that either side hasn't said that you really want to get on the record, or something that you want to come back to and rebut. You guys went first, so let's give the opponents a chance to make your last push here.
You want to go first, Ed?
I think any change that we make, and I'm not opposed to election reform. I know our current system is not perfect, but we've built an amazing country with a system that is not perfect. But any change we make to how we vote and how we tally votes has to show indisputable that it provides benefit. And ranked choice voting just doesn't do that. It does not live up to their claims for a majority vote. It doesn't live up to the claims of eliminating the spoiler effect. And there's plenty of data. For every report or study they show that, hey, people like it, I can point to another study or data that shows it disenfranchises significant portions of the electorate. So I think it's a terrible mistake.
Okay. Opponents?
I would just like to speak, I guess, to Oregon. Between 2010, and 2022, 31 elections for federal and statewide offices in Oregon, that's 16%, ended without a majority winner. Voter turnout in Oregon primaries averages 35 to 45% versus about 70% in a general. Ranked choice voting pushes you toward the general election. In 2024, 49 candidates won statewide and congressional primaries with less than 50% of the vote, 12 with 1/3 or less. We are not saying that ranked choice voting is perfect. As Isabella said right at the beginning, it is a step. And just as we did with vote by mail, we move step by step into greater democracy. Right now, democracy is so under threat across this country. More than half our states have passed laws to reduce the ability of people to vote. We are simply saying it's really time to show in Oregon we have always been a democratic state. I don't mean party, I mean democracy.
Small d, yeah.
And we very much want to take the step toward greater democracy in Oregon.
Great. Sorry to throw you guys out. We have a 10 o'clock. We have a 10 o'clock interview waiting. If you have anything you'd like to leave with us to read, we'd love to have that. Or, thank you.
I heard you're doing 5 a day, which
Yes,
strikes me as bordering on insanity.
It is. It's not bordering.